we are in history in an unprecedented asset bubble, because the fiscal deficits combined with money printing have been very favorable since 1981 for bonds, for stocks, for commodities, for real estate. Now, recently, and this I have to mention, here we have an example that money printing doesn't always help. In the last 5 years, commercial properties have tanked, although money printing has continued at a very high rate. So if people say, oh, I just buy stocks because of money printing, it will depend what kind of stocks you buy. There's some markets like the US. I think the US is in a terminal phase of a bull market. I call this the Trump top. And from here on, and here we have to adjust the value of stocks for the rate of inflation. You talked about inflation around 10%. I agree with you. I think for most households in the US, it's been 5 and 10%. But the Fed, the 10 years bond yield is at 4.5%. So interest rates are strongly negative. This kind of favors for assets to go up, but not all assets. And number two, against gold and the hard currencies, probably these assets will go down. I think the dollar is significantly overvalued. The US would greatly benefit from having a very friendly relationship with China and expand the trade. The fact is simply, the man on the street in the Western world has been brainwashed and believes that the evil Chinese, they have low salaries and they undercut the salaries of Western workers and this and that. This is all nonsense. The salaries in China are, of course, far higher than in Bangladesh or India or Vietnam. But the advantage of China is that you have a group of people who are highly educated. To the tune, say, America produces this many engineers every year, or physicians or mathematicians, and China produces 10 times more. And you look at international service. These are not services made by Chinese, but by international groups. The best universities in science, technology, mathematics, physics, and so forth, out of the 10 best in the world, normally 6 are in China. If someone tells me that Harvard is the best university, I have to laugh out loud, because I know how many of these Harvard people have bankrupted companies. The cause of inflation, as you know, is government fiscal policies. In other words, you create deficits, and you have an accomplice in the form of your central bank that you followed for the last 40, 50 years. And they are printing money. And I have so many books and read so many literature about the subject. A central bank that prints money is a criminal, because they impoverish by purpose the lower income recipients and the middle class, and they enrich the asset holders who were born already with money or who were favored by the government through policies and so forth. This is The Economics of Inflation by Bresciano Turoni. That describes the social impact of inflation. It also describes how stocks and gold performs during inflation. It also describes concentration of wealth. This is what has happened. Money printing favors people like me. I have assets. They favors people like you. You have also assets, and destroys blue-collar family. Another book that I highly recommend. Of course, the academics will never talk about this because it's not in their interest. They want interventions. The government says this, that. And the government, as we know now, and is being documented, is stealing from people all the time. But this book describes socialism, capitalism, and democracy. The capitalistic system is not perfect. It has also some disadvantages, but it's still the fairest system. When I went to school, in my final years, interest rates in 69, that's the year I kind of wrote my thesis, on the 10 years treasury bond were around 6%, because inflation had accelerated during the Vietnam War and the social programs of Johnson. Now, in the 70s, these interest rates, and I was a friend of Sidney Homer. He wrote the Bible about interest rates, the history of interest rates, and through him I met Henry Kaufman and we became friends, and we still correspond nowadays. And interest rates went to over 15%. on the 10 years treasury. The high was 15.84 and deposits rate were around 20%. That surprised me. But at that time, bonds were considered certificates of confiscation. And I would never, although I had studied about a character called Silvio Gesell, who in the 1910s, 1920s had written about negative interest rates, but I would never have thought that interest rates could become negative. Number two, when I went to China the first time and I saw this incredible country and the poverty and the choices in departments, so you could buy a blue suit or a green suit, and that was it. You wanted a taxi, you had to tell the hotel you wanted a taxi, and they ordered it and so on. And that in essentially 40 years, the country has come this far with the modern infrastructure. Incredible. And a third thing, I was born in the environment and started to work in 1973. The most popular stocks at that time, as you remember, were the Nifty 50 in America. Among them, Polaroid, Dr. Land, and Kodak. And both of them essentially disappeared. So the technology progresses, but not all companies benefit to the same extent. Xerox was also one of the most popular stocks. Digital equipment and Sears, JCPenney were also among the Nifty 50. So there are many things that have surprised me a lot in my life. I think there's no hope that the Fed would crash the stock market voluntarily, especially not under the current administration. You look at who is in the administration. They're all billionaires or rich people. They all own stocks. Do you think Elon Musk wants to crash the stock market? No way. Every society in history, that I guarantee you, has chosen the easier way. Tax is an inflation. It arises inflation because the government doesn't collect it in official taxes. Because it would be painful for a politician to go to the people and say, okay, we have to increase taxation. No, the people wouldn't vote for him. Or it would be painful for someone to go to the people and say, look, we have to tighten our belt. We're going to cut all the pensions of the policemen and the veterans, the firefighters and so forth. Nobody will get elected. They have a revolution. So the easiest way is just to print money. And I think this printing of money will lift assets. But as I explained, we had money printing and commercial properties went down. According to Goldman Sachs indices, housing affordability is at the lowest in history. The young people don't earn enough money. When I started to work on Wall Street in 1970, I could rent a flat easily with my salary, and my salary wasn't particularly high. In Zurich, I paid about 15% of my salary for an apartment in the center of the city. Nowadays, you pay 70 or 100% of your salary as a trainee when you start in an investment bank or so. What is happening in the markets is very interesting because the US stock market has outperformed Europe and emerging economies for the last 10 years. In some cases, actually more than 10 years. In some cases, maybe 5 years. And these markets have gone down to some extent, also in absolute terms. Say you look at Chinese stocks, they're at the bottom and America is up in the sky. In 1989, the Japanese market was 50% of the world's stock market capitalization. At the time, I thought that Japan would go down and that it would drag down other markets as well. But no, I was wrong. The Japanese market went down and the Nasdaq went ballistic. So my view is the US could go down and markets like China, Hong Kong, the Asian markets, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and so on could go up. And especially, I believe that Latin American markets are inexpensive. So also in a world war, Latin America is out of sight of the world. The war theater will probably be Middle East, Central Asia, because I have some well-informed friends. They think an attack by the US, Israel on Iran is imminent. If that happens and they want to create the greater Israel scheme, I think that it will not be welcomed by Russia and China because China depends on Middle Eastern oil. So if Israel takes the Gaza Strip, China could argue, well, if they take the Gaza Strip with American help, why shouldn't we take Taiwan? Why shouldn't we take Cambodia, Laos, and why not Thailand? Some people think that we are about to enter World War III, and the situation in the Middle East is very tense. I mean, the world looks at the US differently than Americans look at America. And you said you are Fed-centric. I am a person who already as a child, I was maybe 8 years old, went to Yugoslavia. Even as a child, I could see the incredible poverty compared to the Western world in the 1950s, because the Western world, especially Switzerland, had become already reasonably prosperous. Who gives it nowadays? It's about millionaires. The money has depreciated incredibly. But this is not what I wanted to talk about. But then as a student, I was ski racing in Eastern Europe, and I saw the poverty there. And then I went to Hong Kong, and then we went to Russia in 1980, and I could see they had markets where people would line up to buy rotten tomatoes and apples and carrots and so forth. And I went to China. The whole country was in incredible poverty, and everywhere in Eastern Europe, people were depressed. And what I want to really emphasize here, the young people today who won't vote for the socialists and the rich people who vote for the socialists are a disaster, because they haven't seen the oppression that occurs under socialism and capitalism. This is the essentially ideology of freedom and of prosperity. That I want to say. You go to China today, you go to India today, Vietnam, Russia, Eastern Europe, everywhere the standards of living have been lifted by the capitalistic system and the market economy. That has to be told to the young students who always vote socialists, and to the academics at universities who are mostly socialists because they're jealous of uneducated people being successful in business.